I had a hard time starting this one. First, I stumbled many, many times over the introduction, and then my phone rang like 3 times in 10 minutes, which it never does. So I put it on Do Not Disturb. I want to talk about the Stoic practice of anticipating your mortality. Right, the Stoics, Seneca, Aurelius, describe this practice of anticipating your mortality, specifically by kind of reconstructing the consequences of your mortality, like the funeral ritual, imagining the grievers, imagining what would happen after, as a way of really amorphizing, concretizing, that's the word I meant, not amorphizing, concretizing the understanding that we are going to die. I say this, and I can say it in a kind of flip way, but it shouldn't be flip. It should be a realization with consequences that directly impact now. And that's what I want to talk about today, because those present day consequences shouldn't be morose or sad or anxious even, although as we contemplate death, and Seneca says this, what we fear, if we really look at it, is what happens beforehand. We don't know what happens afterwards, and that not knowing is heavy enough that it feels like fear. But the fear is focused on the precedent and perhaps the moment of. We don't want to be in pain. We don't want regret, remorse. Right? So the exercise can kind of extend a little bit. Like I frame it a little bit differently, in that I don't know how I'm going to die, like whether it's an asteroid through the window or keel over after eating some rotten tofu. See, I'm joking about even that, right? Disease, bad luck. I don't know the how, but I do know the manner in which I want to go through that. And I want to go through that clear-eyed, clear-headed, stable, authentic, right? And all of those are the words I use to describe how I want to approach any moment, the moment now. The exercise of anticipating mortality highlights that construct, highlights that necessity. But I think the true blossoming of that realization is that we have the option to exist in a moment that is truly pleasurable. And let me talk about that. Truly happy, truly virtuous. And I don't mean by that moralistic virtue, and I don't mean sense pleasure. Because neither of those things bring true happiness. Sense pleasure is there. We're inundated with it, particularly those of us alive in a household who aren't monastic. And sense pleasure is there to be enjoyed, without doubt. Food and love and beautiful walking, those are pleasures, but they are not going to yield happiness, right? Because I'll eat a beautiful dinner with some well-cooked tofu that isn't going to poison me, and I can enjoy it. But if I expect that sensation, that pleasure to continue, I'm only going to be disheartened at best and angry at my lack of tofu at worst. So the contemplation of the mortal moment, the transition moment, the bardo, for me is really equivalent to what it means to be happy. And that is, I think, best summarized as stability, clarity, compassion, openness, authenticity. Okay, so that's how I want my final moment to be. And I'll be more specific because, like in prison, the condemned person is offered a final meal. So what would my final meal be? I talked about this a few years ago in a podcast when I was still doing podcast episodes before I started doing video. And I leaned into that question after reading Plato's Apology, which is his description of Socrates' last day and night. So now for Socrates, he did know the when and the how. He also kind of knew the why, right? And so he was able to choose deliberately how to spend the last 18 hours of his life. And he chose to be surrounded by his companions, his students, his friends, and to talk about philosophy, not just the philosophy of what may or may not happen after drinking hemlock and dying, but what it is to live a good life, a virtuous life, a happy life. So if Socrates, which he surely did, was to have exercised this practice and said, this is how I would like to be, this is how I'd like the context of my death to be, on a daily moment-by-moment basis, he would have cultivated those friendships. He would have cultivated the study of philosophy so that was available to him when he died. In a way, he was fortunate that he knew that that's when he was going to die, because he could then create that construct. If he didn't know, then he would have to simply live a life that was constantly focused on philosophy, surrounded by friends, discussing what it is to live a virtuous life. So I want my final moment to be a moment of crystalline awareness, which for me is a thing of beauty, the contemplation and consideration of the sort of sphere of phenomena without manipulation, right? Without sort of the obscuration of distraction, without the obscuration of negative karma, right? This is a high bar to reach, but in that podcast when I talked about my last meal, I said no food for me, because I like to eat, but I tend towards gluttony. I don't enjoy the food and then allow it to have been. I do consume another piece of pie or another piece of pizza because the first one was good, so the second one will be better. So I said I wanted my final meal to be a pint glass filled with ice and sparkling water. I think in the podcast I said Perrier. It could be, this is filled with seltzer water, sparkling water. I want my consciousness to feel effervescent like that sparkling water. I want that sparkling water I want to experience it in every molecule of my body, this sort of bright, refreshing, fluid, crystalline sense of being and experience. And I want to drink that glass of water, and I want to sort of immerse myself in that sensation. So to do that, well, I stopped drinking alcohol not quite 2 years ago, because the fear I have for my death, I have the fears everyone has, right? I don't want to oversell what I'm saying here, but the particular fear that I have is the fear of being drunk when I die. Either drunk because of alcohol, or drunk because I'm in some other way incapacitated and cannot maintain that clarity. I would rather be battered by pain than to be inoculated from sensation. So I stopped drinking. And the motivation for me to stop drinking was this anticipation of the moment of my mortality, because that decision to drink or not is absolutely in my control. And I would feel pretty fucking stupid if I had a nice glass of whiskey, which without doubt I'd be enjoying, and then keeled over, unaware that I was dying because I was drinking. I don't want that. And I don't want that enough that it's really it's a lodestar. It's a navigational beacon for a lot of my behavior now. And so from that, right, and I learned, it almost happened, I didn't almost die, but my dog Reggie, who we all love. Reggie was an awesome dog. We knew he was ill, but he got very, very sick very, very quickly. And we'd been away for a weekend and came back. Came back on a Saturday. And I sat and started listening to music and having some whiskey. And then it became apparent that he ended up dying just 3 days later. But that Saturday we went to the emergency vet, and I was drunk. And I almost was drunk while he would have been. If he had been euthanized that day while I was drunk, I would not forgive myself. And more than that, I don't want that. So I ended up not drinking. I can't say that was the last time I ever drank. But from that, and it certainly wasn't the first time I'd thought about not drinking. But I can pinpoint that moment and say, from then on, it was a matter of time before I actually did make the decision not to ever drink, not to drink again. Can't say never, but that's where I am right now. And so I sobered up, got over the hangover on Sunday, and then that Tuesday, he had rallied a little bit because they did treat him, but he wasn't gonna make it. So that's my dog, right? I don't want that to be a factor in my interaction with any of my loved ones or with my own contemplation. That desire for clarity, articulated as the manner in which I want to approach my mortality, then moves out into all other decisions around exercise, the very fact that I meditate, my meditation practice is, as much as it's geared towards anything, it's geared towards understanding the sort of simultaneous overlap and difference between the moment now. Well, look, because here's the thing. This moment now, at some point, is going to be the moment when I die. So I hope this is being helpful to any of you. I just occurred to me that I'm not quite making the point. There are two other things that I had in mind that I wanted to say, and I don't know if it's going to help or hinder this session. But one of the things that I really like about the Apology, Plato's documentation of Socrates, is of course all the conversation and the discussion. But periodically, through the dialogue, through the writing, Plato describes how Socrates is sitting. Like, he's got a foot on the ground, another foot under his knee, or he's got both feet on the ground. There's 3 or 4 times where the position of Socrates' feet is mentioned. And I find that really moving. Like, it makes it possible to really physically connect to Socrates sitting there. Like right now I'm sitting in a very loose cross-legged pose. You can't see my legs, but I'm on a cushion. Does it make a difference to you to know how I'm sitting, the sort of sense of the weight? It makes a difference to me to know how Socrates was sitting, and the fact that Plato noted it. It just makes it so specific, doesn't it? It makes it like it brings us directly into the space as if we were also a participant with Socrates. But it also makes me aware of what Socrates, what the phenomenology of being Socrates was. And he was comfortable sitting with his feet crossed or feet on the ground or standing up. In that moment. Right? And then the other thing I wanted to bring into this, and I'm just going to bring it in even though I've sort of lost the thread a little bit. My friend, my mentor, Lowry, taught art classes, and he would ask his students the question, a similar question, but different. Anticipate the end of the universe, the end of time, the heat death of the universe, whether that's through gradual expansion and heat loss or whether it's through contraction. The end of the universe, the end of time. And you wanted to have an ice cream cone at the very last moment of the universe. Okay, so what would you need to do? You need to make sure that someone knew how to make ice cream, that no matter what the universe was doing, that you had a freezer, right? That you had access to dairy, whether that was a live cow. Do you need to somehow then figure out how to sustain a cow, a dairy cow, for the next, 35 billion years, right? And, the students would come up with all kinds of things. It wasn't so much what they came up with, but the idea that if you want something to be something, you need to move backwards so that what you're doing now feeds into it. So whether it's the heat death of the universe or your own final moment, take it in 2 ways. One is, it will happen, so don't be unthinking about the moment today, because you don't want that final moment to be filled with regret. But if there are, take the exercise and say, okay, not just become familiar with it, but shape a little bit what you would like that to be. What would you like that moment to be? I want it to be crystal and clear and effervescent. So what should I be doing today to make sure that that is the case? I also, when I'm drinking my fizzy water, I want to be listening to the final movement of Mahler's Third Symphony. Because that movement, those movements, from the, if you know the symphony, from the bim bam, when the children's choir is singing the angelic bells, from then on, it's just sort of lift off to whatever, but it is a lift off. And it's a beautiful, fluid sort of mix of rose gold and pale blue. It's different from the end of the ninth, which I think is an easier alignment, because the end of the ninth really does sort of fade off. But I want that supercharged fluid clarity. Bim bam, and then da, 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 dee, da, da, da. I'll link to the video I did a few months ago about Mahler. So look, that's me. Take it for what it's worth. But do this exercise yourself. Let me know in the comments what you come up with and what it feels like. Don't allow it to become morbid and morose, right? It's okay to be afraid. I'm afraid. But we can make it familiar. At least the acceptance that it's gonna happen. And we don't have to spend our life distracting ourselves from the fact that it will happen, which is, I think, a malaise that we have in our society today, that on top of everything, sort of the alienation of the world we live in, on top of that, right, we have an underlying disagreement about whether we're going to die or not. And the energy that we put in as a culture to deny that. I'm talking about where I live, which is the United States, but, sort of modern, Western, post-industrial. It's a spiritual malaise, and whether intentionally or not, it drives all of the shit that we're going through now. That, combined with the greed of the extraction-based economic model that we have, which is a death wish. Right? We have a death wish and a death fear combined together in our society today, and it's fucked. So we can take part of that away with this practice. So that seems like a good place to end. Please let me know what you think. Comments, questions, disagreements, suggestions, anything. Just let me know. You are to keep your wits about you. That's why I always end these videos with that. Keep your wits about you. And I'll leave it there.